Hey everybody, and welcome back to ACE-IT. I wanted to continue the theme of using different tools like hammers to help us understand how to impart maximum force on the disc. And there's this idea of snap or the hit in disc golf. And I think of snap as the effect of accumulated lagged acceleration of the chain that caused that high acceleration spike near the end of the extension. And the problem is, as we were showing last time, if we're swinging an object or swinging the disc, there's this problem, since we don't actually impact anything in space, of what are we hitting or what are we slashing through with the disc? Where should our body be relative to that? So we're going to continue that theme a bit, talk about how we can use things like hammers, showing how we can punch through or hit through a target to impart maximum force, and how by extension we can use that to increase the power that we put on the disc. Now, if I were trying to teach you how to put maximum force into a punching bag, consider how this would work. And this was one of the harder things to learn initially in martial arts training, because we have all these natural tendencies about what we think might cause the most force, but it's the same problem. It's lagged acceleration, and it's about striking through a target in order to impact that force onto the target. And so when you see people like karateka breaking boards or breaking other objects, it's about trying to put that force line on the other side of the target with some kind of lag process. And so just to illustrate those examples, if I were given the problem of punching a bag and trying to knock it as hard as I can off the rocker, I could stand here kind of inactive on my legs, and I could flail with it at my arm. And you can see that that's very low impact on the target. I'm aiming directly at the bag rather than using my body or my legs to drive through the bag. And so as soon as we change our posture a bit and get a bit of spring into our stance, and I think about punching just through the other side of that target, it's much easier for me to solve that problem when I'm using the ground and I'm using my stance and I'm driving with the whole body with lag into it. And so even if I move very slowly, there's a lot more heavy momentum or weight in that strike, and there's very low impact and effort on my body when I strike that target. So we want to solve that same problem, except now imparting that on the disc, and instead of striking an object, we want to hit something more abstractly out inside space. Now we have our trusty hammer, and I suggest whenever you do hammer drills or swings of any kind, you start with a lighter hammer. So what I'm first going to do is illustrate the same idea I did with my fists, but here with the hammer, and then we're going to take that drill away from the bag again to try to recreate this idea of the hit, or slashing or hitting through the target, which is similar to what we want to achieve on the disc. So as I was starting to allude to last time, there are a lot of similarities between what kind of posture and how I need to strike this target with the hammer. And so if I were to do what we just did in the martial arts drill and just kind of try to tap away at this bag with my arm, obviously there's not a lot of power in that strike. If I were to get now in a different stance, and apologize for my derriere, but this is the best angle in my basement here, notice I've got this full body rock. I'm swinging it as though a battering ram or another heavy object, and you can immediately tell I'm queuing up a much bigger strike. The spacing here is really important. So I don't want to be all the way out here trying to swing at the target and barely nicking away at it. I don't want to be in here sort of cramped in, right? So I certainly, in martial arts, you can learn close range strikes, but they're not as strong as the strikes where you have a little bit more spacing to create that lagged acceleration and impact and get your weight of gravity and so on into it. So a hammer and a disc strike, so to speak, are really no different. If I want to take this hammer, I want to get some sense of the relative spacing, and I want to feel that my shoulder's in a comfortable position. I want to feel that my elbow is lagging the shoulder, the wrist lagging that elbow, and that hammer head is coming around, maintaining that same leverage on the hammer we talked about before. And so if I do that, I can cue up my spacing here. I can find a nice comfortable stance, swing the hammer back. It's always good to take a practice swing. Take it back and swing it through into the target. I don't recommend trying this out on a swinging heavy bag like this. I'm used to using it from things like martial arts. but this is the object I have to impact. Really, if you have the opportunity to swing a hammer at an object, just going through this exercise of finding your spacing and posture, and you can get a rhythm. That thump, there's no effort. Just like I don't want to feel effort if I'm swinging down into a nail. I just want to be able to repeat that action nice and easy into the target in a comfortable position for my body and the arm. Now, when I swing as though disc golfing, I want to find a way to swing back and forward comfortably. And as I swing back, my weight is loading up into this backswing, as we talked about. So I want to feel as though I'm braced back. And then when I swing forward from that backswing position, notice this is the shift from behind that we've talked about. I want to make sure that my weight is basically falling backwards toward the target, which is the most efficient action for the legs and the hips. It's not about the legs and the hips, it's about the entire body, the entire chain. If we think about just the hips coming through, this is where you get people doing these sort of torquing motions with the hips jerking through, such that even when you watch them throw, they're not themselves necessarily using that action. And if they are, what they've actually done is they've allowed their core and their hips to open out to the target, which is much less powerful than swinging with that attire simply closed toward the target. So you can see here, my shoulder is stacked over this front leg. And if you were standing there, you would much rather be hit by somebody kind of wildly torquing open from the front side versus me standing here and cueing it up and swinging the hammer out in that direction, right? Sorry for the violent analogy, but hopefully that can help get the point across. So if we want to take that hammer strike, just observe a couple of other things about this. So I could still mostly swing with the arm, but I'm cued up on the front leg. I'm getting a little pump off of that front leg. So if I just kind of let all of this flail out here and swung back, I can still get a fair amount of hit on that. Now, if I add a couple of the other mechanics that we would like to see, stabilize this bag for a second, find my spacing out. Now what we're going to do is we're going to observe my rear side swim and counterbalance with the leg as part of the weight shift, right? And that's going to add additional power into the swing. So if I cue up back, and you could continue to increase the power like that. So this is, to me, the fundamental reason that hammers are really interesting. It helps give you this idea of how posture and lower body mechanics relate to a physical place to hit. So let's consider now how we can take that target away and retain the hit and increase that snap at that hit point. So now we're considering snap and the hit with a hammer when I have nothing to physically hit. So what we're looking for is the same idea that we learned from the bag. We're going to have a swing that's coming forward over that front knee, over the plant, from a backswing, and do a hit point. And notice that as I swing out this way, I've got a very similar motion to what I use when actually striking the bag. I've got that shoulder leading the elbow, leading the wrist. The key here, as we discussed last time, is that I've got and maintained tension through this wrist such that I can feel the same sort of motion that would cause that maximum force on the bag where I'd hit it. And it doesn't matter what depth I swing at. I could swing low, I could swing high. And so much like if I were swinging a baseball bat or similar object, I'm trying to make contact out somewhere in space and swing through that hit or contact point. So if I were a baseball player and I were cueing up the other side to swing the bat, I would be thinking of swinging through, leading with my weight and my hips pulling through to make contact through that ball. So bring it here to my natural backhand side. Just rocking gently back and forth. And I'm imagining that there's a heavy bag somewhere right out in there where the hammerhead is smashing through that contact point. And if you look carefully, you'll still see, as we discussed last time, that arm is starting to naturally rotate. If I were to swing a little bit faster, it would start to pull me into follow through and so on. And so you have to fuss with this a little bit, as I do myself, to sort of find, all right, what's going to get me that strongest hit out here in the simulated space. Now, you yourself different professional players have different arm slots. And what I mean by that is if you observe what I do when I approach the bag, I could be swinging relatively low, I could be swinging more medium, I could be swinging high relative to my own body. So pros will adjust their posture for different angles and different lines of play as they land into the plant to swing. They can also adjust arm slots. Many of them have a preferred or single arm slot. Some of them adjust their arm slots. So for instance, you might see Simon Lizotte or Garrett Gurthey swing low relative to their body on certain shots. Their arm is coming through, often on a big hyzer or spike hyzer line. Someone like Drew Gibson will tend to prefer the medium arm slot. You'll see someone like Matty O or Paul Macbeth often swing from this high arm slot. So Macbeth's interesting because he'll tend to swing quite high up here for a lot of his controlled shots. You might observe him come down closer to the middle or low slot if he's really mashing on a long distance hyzer. So he just has master control over this, and again, as we've discussed, has very, very long arms, and so he's still able to get a lot of leverage up here like somebody like Matty O. I'm more of a stout guy, taller with shorter limbs. I usually find more power somewhere in here. I'm swinging much closer to my center of gravity as a bigger guy, and that's just sort of one way I'm going to increase my moment of inertia, which is where I'm going to get more of my power because I can't rely on the levers. So I think it's important then to think about what your relative low slot are. A medium slot, swinging forward every time, swinging forward and back over that front leg, and then swinging relatively high. Find that comfortable arm slot. And when you're finding that arm slot, then comfortably try to find, all right, well, if I were to hit that target out in front of me, just like the bag, where would that hit point be? How would I find that kind of leverage on the disc? So you'll hear a lot of the time, why do certain high-level players throw so far when it looks like they're doing so little? And that is about certainly their levers and their athleticism and their background. It's about also the efficiency of this late chain kinetics, right? So what's happening as they're transferring that momentum to the disc at the end of the chain. And I think a lot of people struggle mightily with this, even if they put a lot of work into their rhythm and timing and posture. And these hammer drills are the kind of thing that help me break through because it's just much harder for me to get my body to understand how to do that with something that weighs so little. And so when you're having somebody cue up to throw from the front leg, notice you can rock around exactly like we did. This is me coming through like I showed last time, closer to my low arm slot. So if I were to throw down here, my pocket and posture will look a little bit different, but relatively speaking, I'm trying to get all of those levers synced up to get maximum impact on that target, right? And so if I'm swinging high, this is where I tend to have the most trouble finding a leverage position, right? I don't get a sense of a whip anywhere up here, something I continue to work on. I can find a pretty good whip out in that medium regime, right? Somewhere like there. And as I slash that disc through, I'm trying to find that similar hit point on the target. And so you might find, as you saw there, that the disc might be inclined to start to pivot out. I really encourage you to resist that. And so it's a little bit better for you to think of this as slashing a blade, swinging a hammer, swinging a club. And you want to kind of get that nice leverage position, feel like you're gripping a hammer or some other instrument in your hand, and imagine slashing through that. And the slash, I'm going to now emphasize it from my leg, is not about my hand. You can stand and throw, but like we saw in the bag, got to generate it from the lower body. So now I'm just going to focus on pumping. And you can see that it already tries to pull out of my hand a little bit just by maintaining that position. And so I just rock gently and I pump off the leg. And it wants to pull me up and around toward that target. So now if I start trying to take that same idea and release it into the target, find that nice rhythm. Pendula help you rock efficiently back and forth. More on that soon. And so if I extend into the backswing, and so that to me feels like an exceptionally low effort move. And of course I can't find the disc, so I'll grab another one. And yet there's a fair amount of force coming out through that chain. And the point of this is I don't want you to be micromanaging what your arm is doing. Because the more you're doing that, the more likely it is you're out of posture, And the more likely it is you're going to get something wrong trying to time it, especially as you throw faster. So doing things like hammer drills and just rocking with the disc, trying to find those leverage swings, increase your consistency, and they also allow you to just kind of feel your way into those high impact pathways for the disc. And so if I just kind of rock back and forth again. And so this is the kind of stuff I do to get these late chain kinetics to be much stronger in my game. Now, what are the advantages of that? Obviously throwing farther. The other things that really help for me on the course is, well, I can approach a lot of really rugged terrain and upshots, not worrying about a run up whatsoever, not worrying about where my left foot is and how do I get a good stance to rock back and forth. I can literally just get balanced enough to get a pump off of that front leg and swing the disc through. And what you come to see is that the X step and other things start to look like window dressing. They're absolutely adding power. I would never contest that idea. But what I'm trying to illustrate here is how much of the power just comes from intact kinetics at the very end of the throw. And a lot of that is about the transfer on the late wrist and doing it safely. So a couple more points about safety here to close out. Number one, listen to your body. Your body is your guide. There's a big difference between pain and injury and discomfort and challenge. And I think a lot of people get carried away by not recognizing or confusing the two. Hammers are not just tools, they're weapons, right? You might find that you accidentally release a hammer, right? And so I do a lot of this inside. I've practiced at this point a decent amount with hammers. I know the difference between a hit that's going to send it slinging typically. Notice I'm usually aiming at something like a blanket or a bag, and I'm not outside near where people can get hurt. So please be safe with these tools. Start light. Just like weight training, I'm not going to start you with 500 pounds on the bench press, right? So the big problem people have, I find, when they do hammer drills is they're worried about stress in the elbow and shoulder. This is why hammers are really useful feedback tools. I started to get really efficient lower body late or early chain kinetics from all the coaching that I've received. Shout out again, Seabass 22. And so I'm getting more and more whip on the front side, but my crappy arm mechanics started to be a liability. And so working with the hammers and starting really light and just trying to find that natural spacing and rhythm and letting the arms swing forward and back, nice and easy, and rolling through that motion and finding something that I can impact at a light to medium to hard impact as I practice is really helpful. Once you find those paths, then you can consider getting more feedback from heavier and heavier hammers, okay? And so, of course, when doing all of this, I don't think heavy bags are the best place to go. I think you have solid objects outside, soft pads. You know, be smart, be safe if you're going to take this approach to training. I do think it's immensely valuable if you have trouble with lag and snap and late acceleration, okay? One more conceptual thing before I let you go. But John, what about the power pocket? What about leading with my elbow or elbowing down the door or pulling or keeping the shoulder at 90 degrees, okay? None of these points are necessarily bad advice, but you have to remember they're coaching points, as is what I'm going to tell you now. Not every player maintains strictly 90 degrees. In fact, most don't through the swing. Gibson dips below and then goes very wide again. Girthy achieves something like 165 degrees of angle at the extension into the hit. And that's going to vary by your anatomy, by your throwing style, and so on. And so I just want to talk again briefly about this power pocket notion. You are swinging in towards your center of gravity at some height relative to that, and out again back toward the line of play into that release point. And the hammer is a feedback tool to help you find those relative angles and spacing. So if my hit is somewhere around here, this is a much wider angle at that height than 90 degrees, right? And how did that occur? Well, that's where my kinetic chain will kind of brace me up and allow me to swing forward. That's going to adjust a little bit if I change my arm slot. That's going to adjust a little bit if I change my off arm style, and so on. So when you're thinking about tricks like 90 degrees, it's kind of about avoiding the pocket collapsing is one way I think about it. Hammers help you do that too, because if you start to speed up the hammer, notice that it's going to deflect toward me, and that claw is coming at my chest. So this is why when I recommend if you try a hammer drill, start slow, just like everything else you do in disc golf, right? You don't want claws coming in and hitting you, but this is also teaching my arm to resist that force bringing the hammer in, and it's creating a stronger, more rigid object for swinging it back away from me, right? And so this takes some adjustment and it takes some time to repeat, okay? So again, the idea is don't worry too much about the exact angles, worry about the problem of high impact on this hit point, this release point out in front of you somewhere. Find where that is relative to your body and use tools to help you get the leverage that'll increase the hit in the disc. So hopefully some of that was helpful to you. Get out there and have some fun with hammers.